Okay, that's just after 2 o'clock now, so we'll get started. So good afternoon, everybody. I'm Susan Szymborski-Welsh. I'm the Woodland Carbon Codes Communications Coordinator. I'd like to welcome you all today and thank you for joining our webinar. Over the course of the next 45 minutes or so, our presenters Pippa Lewis and Billy Golden will provide an overview of the steps involved in mapping your project for validation and verification under the Woodland Carbon Code. Pippa is our Geographic Information Systems Officer, and Billy is one of our coordinators who helps project developers at each stage of the Woodland Carbon Code process. After their presentations, we'll open out the discussion to answer any questions you might have, so please do pop them in the chat and we'll do our best to answer them at the end. A final thing to say is that our webinar has been recorded today for anyone who can't attend or who'd like to watch it back at the end of the session, so we'll make that available on our website. That's all from me, so I'll now hand over to Billy.
Thanks, Susan. In this webinar, we're just going to be going over the mapping guidance, so sort of the rules for making the Woodland Carbon Code project map, at what stage in the process you need to produce maps of your project, and we'll touch on verification as well. So just quickly going through sort of the mapping rules. We want you to have a base map, which is easy for us to locate where your project is, and include a scale. We want there to be a title of your project that matches your other documents and sort of the name of the project on the S&P registry. That one is very specific because every project has like a unique name. So if you've been through it before, you might have us saying like, oh, can you change the formatting? That's sort of just make sure it matches exactly your other documents, so it's easy to identify your exact project and it doesn't get confused with any others. A clear outer boundary, so so we can see whether there's if there's any sort of other land or open ground sort of included in your project. It's clear what's within your boundary and what's outside of it. We want you to map any open ground if it's more than a quarter of a hectare. So that's say you have multiple areas of 0.1 hectare. That's fine. I mean, we'd like you to map it if you can, but no worries if you can't. But if you have any sort of areas that are more than 0.25 hectares, we'd like you to map that. Any sort of existing woodland or other planting that's going on within your project boundary. Any fencing, stuff like that. If you know where there are going to be tracks in the future, it's good to mark that on, but don't worry if that's in the future and you haven't decided that yet. The grid reference. So again, this is one that we're quite specific on. Every project should have a 6-figure British National Grid reference that's a point within the project, and this would be consistent between the other documents. And yeah, we want you to sort of mark the location of that grid reference as a point within the project boundary. We want there to be a legend so we can sort of see what's going on with the map. And if possible, we'd like you to sort of mark where there's broadleaf. So say, for example, you have an area of broadleaf planting, an area of coniferous planting, sort of different planting mixes. Ideally, these would be mapped out. Again, I appreciate this isn't always possible, or if you have everything's mixed together, but it's useful, especially when you come to verification, if it's clear which areas of the project are planted with which species. And finally, if your map runs to multiple pages, we'd like it to be all merged into one PDF document, and sort of there should be the project name and the grid reference to identify where the map is on each of the PDF pages. So this is an example map that we've produced. So you can see here, we've got the grid reference marked there, we've got the fence and the outer boundary. We can see that it doesn't have to be sort of continuous, your project boundary. So in this case, we've got sort of one compartment that's slightly outside. And we've got the access points marked as well. But yeah, this example is available on our website along with the sort of mapping guidance, so you can have a look through it if you want a model. The mapping rules are slightly more complicated when it comes to natural regeneration. So basically, if you're doing a project with natural regeneration, we want you to show the sort of the seed sources that regeneration is going to come from. This is one of those things where sort of like at registration, we'd like you to sort of show the like areas where you're claiming up front and the areas which are claiming in the future. And then like when it comes to the validation, we'd like there to be sort of like a seedling survey. Only if wait, sorry, let me take that again. Basically, with the natural regeneration, the way that we do it in terms of what you can claim is anything that's within 50 meters of a seed source, that's fine to claim up front. Anything that's more than 50 meters from a seed source, you need to be able to show that there's natural regeneration already taking place that's being suppressed with a seedling survey. You can still get units if you can't do this, but you'll have to wait until the verification sort of shows that there is regeneration. You can't have sort of the upfront PIUs. So we just want sort of these areas where which are sort of treated differently in the code to be like mapped out, so we can see where the seed sources are, what's like within 50 meters of that, and then what's further than 50 meters, and within that, what's further than 50 meters, which parts you think you can claim up front because you can show there is regeneration, and what areas you'll have to wait until verification to get units for. So this is sort of like an example of a natural regeneration map. So you can see here that they've mapped the existing woodland. Note that like some of the existing woodland that's like serving as a seed source is like outside of the project boundary, and that's absolutely fine. They've mapped out the area that's within 50 meters of the seed sources, and they've also mapped out sort of the individual trees that are like serving as seed sources. And then, sorry, it's really small on my screen, but I think we've got the light blue area is the area that they're going to show that there is suppressed regeneration with a seedling survey, and then the darker blue area is like the area that they're not going to claim. So when you're sort of producing your registration documents alongside your map, this will be represented sort of differently in the carbon calculator. There's some guidance on how to fill out the carbon calculator, but it's good if you just sort of note down yeah, what you're trying to claim up front and what will be claimed in the future. And yeah, so on this like lighter blue area that's being claimed up front, you need to do the seedling survey to demonstrate that that there is regeneration that's being suppressed. So this is another map, and a sort of look of something like this. So we can see here that again, it's quite small, so I don't know if you can see this, but the example is on our website. You can see they're sort of showing that like in the different parts of the project, like how many seedlings they're finding. Now, this is something that like for the sort of natural regeneration map, we expect that sort of be sort of in the sort of, as I mentioned, like in one PDF with your main map at registration. For the seedling survey map, we only sort of expect to see this when you sort of come to the validation. So it's okay if you sort of register because that's sort of your plan. If you haven't done that yet, that's absolutely fine. So yeah, so I'll just hand over to Pippa and she'll sort of take you through when to provide these maps.
Great, thanks very much, Billy. I'm just going to take control, so bear with me. Okay, cool. Yeah, hi everyone. So yeah, as Billy said, I'll just take you through a couple of slides now on kind of when we're asked you to provide these maps, and also go into the pre-validation area check in a little bit more depth as well. So we want you to provide your Woodland Carbon Code project map during the registration at this pre-validation area check. but as I said, I'll go through in a little bit more detail and during validation as well. So it's they're not, I think sometimes it gets maybe a little bit confusing that they're all 3 different maps, but it's very much the same Woodland Carbon Code project map that we would like you to submit, or the most accurate Woodland Carbon Code project map that you have. So at the registration, we're very much aware that this is before you plan, is when we ask you to register. So we'd like you to submit your Woodland Carbon Code project map, and we're aware that this is kind of your plan of what you basically plan to plant out, but what you haven't done yet. So if it does change, that's not a problem, but it would be great to kind of get as an accurate map as possible at this stage of what you're planning to plant. And so we'll ask for your Woodland Carbon Code project map at this stage, and we'll just check that it follows the Woodland Carbon Code mapping rules as set out by Billy. So the next stage that we'll ask you to submit your Woodland Carbon Code project map to us is during this pre-validation area check. And in essence, it's where the team ourselves digitize your project and will compare the area claimed in your PDF map to the carbon calculations document. So we'll ask you to submit both documents at this stage. This map that you provide to us should be post-planting, so it should be your final map. It should be accurate and representative of what you've planted on the ground. So once this pre-validation area check is complete, you'll then start the validation process, and that is when you provide the validation body with your Woodland Carbon Code project map also. And it should be the same map that has been approved at the pre-validation area check. And it will be the validators here during validation that checks that Woodland Carbon Code project map also meets the Woodland Carbon Code mapping rules. So, as mentioned previously, I'll go through this pre-validation check in a little bit more detail in the next few slides. So it's often, I think, maybe a check that kind of goes under the radar a little bit, or probably gets kind of missed, or probably not quite understood properly, potentially. So yeah, that's why we're just kind of going into it in a little bit more detail now. So what is it? Always a good place to start. So in essence, it's to ensure that your net planted area in your carbon calculation document and your Woodland Carbon Code project map agree. And it must be completed before validation starts. So what we don't want to happen, and the pre-validation check used to happen kind of during the end of validation, which was a problem if we found that there were errors in the areas agreeing between these 2 documents, because it would mean that a new Woodland Carbon Code project map would need to be produced, and the validation process would kind of have to start again because there were new documents being submitted. So that's why it's really important, just to reiterate, that we get an accurate Woodland Carbon Code project map for the pre-validation check to kind of make the process go as smoothly as possible. This is also the stage in our process where we spatially capture your project. So we'll digitize your Woodland Carbon Code project using your map, and we'll add it to our Woodland Carbon Code GIS database. So maybe a few of you attended the webinar that we hosted probably a month or so ago now, maybe back in January. And I went into a little bit more detail about why it's useful for us to have this Woodland Carbon Code GIS database and how it becomes publicly available. So why we do it? One of the kind of core reasons of this pre-validation check is to sense check the documents. So we want to know that your Woodland Carbon Code project map is correct, and we want to know that your carbon calculations document is correct. So if the areas in both of those documents agree, then it gives us kind of a level of reassurance that the net planted area is correct, and your PIU issuance is also correct, and everything is fine. If one document is slightly, the areas are not agreeing, then it just kind of means it's just a way that we can basically in effect check that these documents are accurate. So another reason of one of the core reasons of why we do it this is where we can check that there's no double counting or overlapping occurring between projects. If we were to just kind of get your PDF map in and try and compare it to all the other PDF maps that we get submitted to us of all the other Woodland Carbon Code projects, it would be pretty impossible for us to make sure that no projects are overlapping. So when we get your PDF map, we bring it into our software, our mapping software, and we digitize it, and we make sure then that your project isn't overlapping with any other Woodland Carbon Code project that has reached this stage. As mentioned before, to create a GIS database of Woodland Carbon Code projects and making that database publicly available is really useful for other organisations and governmental bodies. And then we also we do some of these spatial checks that require GIS software. And I'll go through these spatial checks in the next slide. So I know we keep going, I've mentioned this quite a few times, but it really is very important and part of the core reason why we do this check. So what we actually check, we look at your net planted areas in your carbon calculation document, and we make sure that they agree with your net planted areas in the Woodland Carbon Code project map. So we have your PDF map, we bring it into our GIS software, and we digitize it, and all of the net planted areas that you've labelled out in your project map, we'll tot up the areas and we'll compare them with your carbon calculation document, and we'll make sure they agree. Again, as mentioned before, making sure that there's kind of no overlapping of your Woodland Carbon Code project with other Woodland Carbon Code projects, but also making sure that your planted net area doesn't overlap kind of existing woodland or buildings or roads or anything else like that. We have some eligibility requirements brought in. So your project needs to be more than 1 hectare in area. The woodland blocks and the coops need to be more than 0.1 hectare. And your woodland coops also need to be more than 10 metre widths. So we'll have a quick check of these during the pre-validation check also. If we have some of the woodland creation grant maps available for your project, we'll also do a quick comparison between your Woodland Carbon Code digitised project map and the grant maps when they're available, of course. And this is just kind of almost a version control issue, making sure that they both match. And if they don't match for whatever reason, then we'll normally just drop you an email. And more than often than not, it's just a version control issue. And as mentioned by Billy as well, this natural regeneration of projects. So unless you have a seedling survey to kind of provide evidence otherwise, anything basically for the upfront claimable areas for your natural regeneration project must be within 50 metres of your seed source, so of your existing woodland or individual trees. So we'll just do that check as well during the pre-validation check, making sure that all of your upfront claimable areas are within 50 metres of that seed source. So the process, it has kind of varied a little bit over the past few years, but just to clarify, at the moment, to start your pre-validation check, so you've planted your project and you're ready for validation. You're ready to start your validation. Before you do that, if you email us your Woodland Carbon Code project map and carbon calculation document, we'll then carry out the pre-validation check for you. And we'll either send you an email with it's an official pre-validation complete email with your documents that we've approved attached. And there'll be some we'll list the areas in each document in that email as well. So if your project passes this pre-validation check, you'll get that email come through. And this is the email that you'll need to forward on to your validators. If it fails any of our checks, then we'll email you and we'll resolve these issues. So we try and be kind of as helpful as possible during this. If we think that there might be a reason maybe why the areas aren't matching, for example, then we'll often try and kind of give a reason maybe as to why they're not matching. So we'll email you to resolve the issues. Sometimes it's useful as well to have a Teams meeting, just because it's often, it's quite visual PDF maps and kind of what we've digitized as well. So we'll really do our best to kind of help you resolve any of the issues. And then once we're happy that all the checks have been passed, we'll send you that pre-validation complete email. So that's the end of the pre-validation checks. So if we pretend that your project's gone through registration, you've submitted your Woodland Carbon Code project map, you submitted the map for the pre-validation check and it's passed. And now you submit that same map, the one that's passed the pre-validation check, for validation. So you submit it to your validators. So it'll be the validators who will assess whether your Woodland Carbon Code project map complies with the mapping guidelines and checks that it's consistent with all your other documents. So again, just to reiterate, if your Woodland Carbon Code project map changes during the validation process, then depending on if it's an area change, we may need to repeat the pre-validation area check. So this can kind of delay the process of the validation, which is why it's really important if you can provide us with a correct map at the pre-validation stage. It makes the process so much quicker. Once the validation has finished, the validation process has finished, it's been completed, your Woodland Carbon Code project map will be uploaded to the UK Land Carbon Registry, where it will become publicly accessible. So I know it might seem that we ask for kind of quite a lot of detail, that we have to make sure that everything is really clear. But the main reason for this is that when you upload your project map to the registry, it means that anyone who has a look at that registry, who looks at your map, is able to interpret it and understand kind of everything, understand where it is, understand kind of what your boundary is and what's obviously been planted. So just to, I guess, reiterate the point of, I guess, why we have maybe so many rules and so many requirements in place. It's in essence to try and make your map as clear and concise as possible. Okay, and I think I'm going to hand back over to Billy for the final few slides.
Thanks, Pippa. Yeah, so just thought that we could talk a little bit about verifications. Yes, so if you're not familiar with the Woodland Carbon Code process, you have your validation, which sort of where you get all your documents approved, and they say that your project is eligible for the code basically, and meets the requirements. And then at the 5 years after you've planted, and sort of every 10 years after that, you need to do a verification where you sort of do a survey, see how your project is doing, whether it's sort of on track to meet the projections or that kind of thing. And a big part of the verification is sort of designing your survey. So you sort of divide your woodland up into different strata, place down your plots, and then go and take a sample of your woodland. So we have a look at this sort of example, the same as earlier. They've clearly marked out where their plots are. They've used color coding to show sort of what is in what strata, and you can see as well in this box that they said sort of like the Sitka spruce and the conifers, that's in one strata. Sorry, the Sitka spruce is in one strata. The sort of other conifers are in a separate strata, and then they sort of put together their oak planting and their mixed broadleaf planting into one strata. Now, they've been able to do this because they've marked on their map sort of where they've planted different species. What we see, like a surprising amount, is sort of one organization will do the validation, and then the verification, might be a different project developer taking on the project. And this is, sort of between validation in year 5, but obviously these projects can run for like 100 years. So yeah, basically, if you sort of mark clearly on your validation map where you've planted, it can really help things down the line when you're designing your surveys. as you can see, otherwise basically like comply with the guidelines, like you've got the title in big and you've got the scale, the boundaries clear and things like that. This is another sort of public document, so it will be on the registry and will be able to be accessed. So yeah, it should follow the same guidelines. Otherwise, at verification, the main other thing that we see is if there have been any changes to your project since the validation, and so you might need to redesign your project map to reflect these changes. Now, I think most commonly this is because the validation map has some inaccuracies, or it might be, say you have a field and you have your Woodland Carbon Code project in one corner of the field, and you've drawn your project boundary to sort of include other areas like open land, and then later down the line that might be part of a different project. You might need to redraw the boundaries of your project so they don't overlap, if that makes sense. But yeah, that should only happen in exceptional circumstances. But if you do find yourself in that circumstance, basically it's sort of the same guidelines, just to produce a new map sort of showing what the new boundaries are, and it's helpful to sort of show like which areas have been taken away or which areas have been added to the project, and then we would digitize the project again, sort of going through the process that Pippa explained, just to like measure the area and yeah, check that like when you're saying, oh, my project has sort of lost 2 hectares, that is the change. I think that's all from us today for the presentation, but we've got some time for questions.
Great, thanks Billy, thanks Pippa. Yeah, we've got 3 questions in the chat so far, so we can run through them, and if anyone has any more questions, please do pop them in now. So we have a question from Alessandro. Is additionality a consideration? If so, why is natural regeneration considered additional?
Yeah, so I'm happy to take this one. Yeah, additionality is definitely a consideration. It's sort of assessed as part of the validation through the cash flow sheet. When it comes to natural regeneration, I think it's important to remember that for Woodland Carbon Code, it's always a new woodland creation. So if it's natural regeneration, the idea is that the natural regeneration is suppressed, and then you're taking some kind of action that will allow it to actually grow and turn into a woodland. So most commonly, this is browsing pressure or grazing, that you're like, say, taking out livestock or putting up fences or enacting deer control, that kind of thing, that will then allow like woodland to grow otherwise where it wouldn't otherwise. So that sort of is how it meets the additionality.
Great, thanks Billy. We've got a question from Neil. For the pre-validation check, should/could we provide spatial data for checking instead of a PDF map, shapefiles or geodatabase, etc.?
Great. Yeah, thanks, Neil. I'm happy to take this one. So it is something we have considered. The kind of not issue, but I guess further checks, or maybe it's not quite as straightforward as just sending us a shapefile or geodatabase, is we would still have to check that those shapefiles matched your PDF, just because of version controls, sometimes they are different. So we would still have to bring your PDF map into our GIS software, and we'd then have to compare your shapefiles and just check that it was a match. So in some ways, it creates more checks for us. We'd also have to check your shapefile, make sure there was no overlapping or kind of any digitizing, I guess, common errors that can occur. Often as well, when you create shapefiles, it's very easy to create these small little gaps between kind of your planting areas that you're mapping out, and that's not really very good practice when we're wanting to put this GIS database out into the public. You want a very kind of neat shapefiles, spatial data representing your Woodland Carbon Code project. So if you were to provide us with shapefiles, we'd have to run through those checks as well. We'd have to make sure they're in the same coordinate reference system. So for in some ways, it in essence, it gives us kind of more checks to carry out. If your project, having said all of that, if your project is really big, if it's very complicated, if there are loads and loads of little, you know, planting areas scattered all over the place, then we do sometimes email you and ask if you could provide us with the shapefiles, because even when we carry out those checks, even if we have to carry out all those checks, it still becomes easier for us then to just have your shapefiles because it is such a big and complicated project. But yeah, it's definitely something that we have considered and probably something we'll look at considering in the future. But for the time being, we wouldn't be taking them over the PDF maps. We're still at the moment asking for your PDF maps, and we'll digitize them, and we'll just make sure that everything is kind of in line on our end.
Great, thanks, Pippa. I think we had a similar question from Emma, asking for an update on using or accepting shapefiles for mapping. She's got a secondary question here about why can't you geo-reference the PDF map over the shapefiles accepted? She suggests it's very quick to do and quicker than redigitizing PDF maps.
Yeah, so that is actually what we do. So we get your PDF map and we georeference it into our ArcGIS Pro software. So that is how we digitize our PDF maps. In terms of why can't you georeference the PDF map over the shapefiles accepted, sometimes the georeferencing PDF map is slightly kind of the position, I guess, in terms of how you georeference it. The two sources of your shapefile can be slightly off center from your PDF map. So it can maybe not quite align that way, and then it's a little bit trickier to check that your shapefile does actually match your PDF map. It would still require us to georeference the PDF map into our software anyway, so it would still be, I guess, an additional thing for us to check.
Thanks, Pippa. Had another question from Alessandro. Are there any guidelines regarding measuring carbon in trees and changes in soil carbon due to or after planting?
Yeah, so in terms of the soil carbon, the sort of carbon calculator document that includes a lot of sort of the soil emissions from establishment. It's also possible to claim some soil carbon sequestration through that if you're planting on arable, if you're planting on a site with mineral soil which was previously arable and it's minimum intervention, there's some potential to claim for soil carbon sequestration. I will say I've quite rarely seen this. So if this is something you're interested in, maybe drop us an email and we can talk about it more. In terms of measuring the carbon in the trees, at year 5, which is the vast majority of verifications that we've done, we're not really measuring. We're mostly measuring that it's like a health check, if that makes sense. We're measuring that it's on track, and the stocking density is sort of what has been set out in the carbon calculations, and you can see sort of the projections they're available in the calculator. And then I think from year 15 there is sort of more actual measurement of how much carbon has been sequestered by the trees. There is some information of this in the survey protocol document, which you can find on the templates page on our website. But yeah, I haven't actually seen a lot of year 15 verifications yet, so I don't have a lot of detail on exactly how that works. But yeah, maybe have a look through there and then send us an email if you have any more questions.
Great, thanks, Billy. I think that's us up to date with all the questions. So unless there are any more, I'm just going to share a quick feedback poll for today's session. There we go. You can all see that okay. And yes, just all that is left for me to really do now is to thank our presenters for the very interesting discussion today, and to thank all of you for your excellent questions. And also just to flag that our next webinar will take place a week today. That's Thursday, the 20th of March. That will be on the topic of our biodiversity crediting project. And that's a joint webinar with the Peatland Code team. So you can find out details of that on our website, in our newsletters, and on our social media channels, including the Woodland Carbon Code's new LinkedIn account. But that's it for today. Thank you again for attending, and thanks to our speakers, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.